Hi, I'm Bridal, and today we will be discussing the actions of Dean Corll, otherwise known as Candyman. Before we begin, I feel the need to personally warn you that the occurrences described in this video are grim, including rape, murder, and torture. If you think that you won't be able to stomach these topics, please, for your sake, click off this video. With that covered, let's dive in. Dean Corll was born on Christmas Eve, 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He, along with Elmer Wayne Henley and David Owen Brooks, were responsible for the string of crimes known as the Houston mass murders. There is no set number of deaths, but it is speculated that there is some number between 29 and 76. The crimes spanned from September 25, 1970 to August 3, 1973. Dean Corll was a serial killer, serial rapist, hebephile, a phoebophile, and abductor. To understand what crimes Dean Corll committed, one must first understand what might have gone wrong in his mind. His parents often argued and went so far as to get a divorce when Dean was only 7. This, accompanied by the medical difficulties he had to deal with, resulted in him being quite a loner as a young child. This led to him rarely socializing with other kids. However, he still cared for the well-being of others. In 1950, his parents got married to each other again. This, however, did not last for long. 3 years later, his parents got a divorce again. In the end, his mother got married to Jake West, who eventually even got a divorce with Corll's mother. All of these divorces could not possibly have had positive effects on Corll's mind. Corll, naturally, had a job at his mother's candy shop. At some point of him working there, his teenage co-worker accused him of making sexual advances on him. Instead of Corll's mother looking into it, she simply fired the man. A year or so later, he was drafted to the Army. He was assigned at Fort Polk, and during the 10-month basic training, he realized his homosexuality. After being honorably discharged, he returned to his mom's candy store and continued to make advances toward other employees. In 1967, Corll met the then 12-year-old David Owen Brooks. They became very close, Brooks even seeing Corll as a sort of substitute father. However, the relationship quickly changed for the worse, with Corll paying Brooks to perform oral sex on him. After the candy store closed, Corll got a job at the Houston Lighting and Power Company. Corll's first known victim was Jeffrey Conan, who was a student at the University of Texas at Austin, who was abducted by Corll while hitchhiking on September 25, 1970. Conan was later found buried in the High Island beach. Around the same time of Conan's death, Brooks interrupted Corll in the act of raping 2 teenage boys, who he had fixed to torture boards. However, Corll bought Brooks' silence via the promise of a car. Shortly after this incident, Corll had presented Brooks with an offer: $200 for any child he could lure to Corll's apartment. On December 19th of 1970, Brooks lured 2 boys to Corll's apartment. Corll raped and murdered them. On January 30th, 1971, Corll and Brooks encountered 2 young boys walking home. The boys were lured into Corll's van and brought to his apartment, where they were raped and murdered. Their bodies were buried in a boat shed that Corll owned. Between March and May, Corll abducted and murdered 3 more victims with the help of Brooks. On August 17th, Brooks and Corll encountered an acquaintance of Brooks. His name was Reuben Haney. Corll proceeded to take Haney home and strangle him to death. In the winter of 1971, Brooks lured Elmer Wayne Henley to Corll's apartment. For reasons that will likely never be discovered, Corll spared Henley and extended to him the same offer that he gave to Brooks. However, Henley ignored the offer for a few months before he finally gave in, due to the dire financial situation befalling his family at the time. On March 24, 1972, the trio encountered an acquaintance of Henley named Frank Aguirre. They persuaded him to come to Corll's apartment via the promise of marijuana and beer. Once Henley saw Corll handcuff the boy to the torture board, he pleaded for Corll not to hurt Frank. Corll instead opted to kill the boy and explained to Henley that there was no slave ring and that he had done that to the last boy Henley had brought him as well. Henley then followed Corll's instructions to bury the corpse under the boat shed. Despite the way that Henley reacted, Brooks said that Henley was also a sadistic individual who enjoyed killing people. However, there is no way to prove or disprove this. The murder spree had continued until August 7, 1973. Henley, who was 17 at the time, lured Timothy Corll to a party at Corll's house. On their way there, they encountered Rhonda Williams, who was waiting outside for her dad to come down from an alcohol-induced rage. Henley took pity on Williams and invited her to the party as well. Initially, Corll was furious about the presence of Williams, but later he had calmed down due to Henley explaining the circumstance of Williams' father and how he drank. They drank and smoked while Corll was waiting for them to pass out. Henley awoke to find himself on the other side of Corll, as he was also gagged and handcuffed, while Corll and Williams were still unconscious. Corll ungagged Henley and explained to him how he was going to kill all of them due to Williams, until Henley promised to him that he would partake in the unholy acts, which caused Corll to free Henley. The two dragged Williams and Corll to Corll's bedroom and strapped them to the board. Corll handed Henley a hunting knife and instructed him to cut off Williams' clothes, to which he responded by beginning to cut off Williams' clothes and ungagging her, which prompted her to ask the question, "Is this for real?" To which Henley responded with "yes," which then caused Williams to ask, "Are you going to do anything about it?" A line which likely saved both her and Corll's lives while ending Corll's. This question prompted Henley to consider the fact that he had never so much as questioned Corll's actions or disobeyed him, which caused him to, for the first time, do so and disobey what Corll had said. He first asked if he could take Williams to another room, which Corll ignored. Henley then proceeded to grab Corll's gun and threaten him with it, which Corll greeted with a request as he began to shout that Henley should kill him and that Henley wouldn't do it, while also slowly approaching Henley. Henley fired the gun once, hitting Corll on the forehead, but not penetrating his skull. Corll continued to slowly lurch toward Henley, prompting him to fire the weapon twice more, lodging a bullet in Corll's left shoulder. Corll then spun and tried to run. Henley gave chase and lodged an additional 3 bullets in Corll's back. Henley then proceeded to call the police, despite having to be convinced to do so by Corll and Williams. Once in custody, Henley confessed to Brooks's and his own involvement in the actions. The police used community service manpower to uncover the bodies, which the locations of which were provided by Henley. One interesting part of the end of this case, being the counting of the bodies, is that the counting abruptly stopped after 25 bodies were uncovered. As I see, this was done in order to prevent the people of the U.S. of having a new, most terrifying killer on their hands, which was done to protect the public from a period of fear that would likely have been induced by revealing the amount of true bodies and murders that Corll had committed. And while I don't agree with what was done, I can understand why it was done. Another crazy event in the timeline of these killings occurred sometime in March 1973, where a couple reported 3 suspicious people digging on a beach. This incident was not explored by the Houston Police Department, considering the fact that if the police had investigated this incident, they could have possibly stopped an entire 5 months of the murder spree. By simply going to investigate a seemingly routine call, they could have uncovered a much, much, much darker secret than anyone could have ever really expected. Corll's blueprint for his crimes was targeting males of the ages 13 to 20, all of which were abducted with the help of his 2 teenage accomplices and were lured with the promises of alcohol and marijuana. Once there, they would be stripped naked and tied to a plywood board. They were then raped, tortured, and murdered. through a number of methods. When he would kill them, he would usually do so by either strangling them or using a .22 caliber pistol. The bodies were then tied in plastic sheets and dumped in one of three places: Corll's boat shed, somewhere near Lake Rayburn, and High Island Beach. In some instances, he would force the teens he kidnapped to write letters to their parents and law enforcement explaining their disappearance. Corll remained the most prolific serial killer in America until only 1978, being dethroned by John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy. That's it for me this time. I'm Bridal, and I'm wishing all of you a Happy New Year, and if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them.